The manuscript was discovered in 1987, tucked between the yellowed pages of a rare copy of Psychology and Alchemy in the private library of Emma Jung, widow of the renowned Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung. For decades it remained hidden, a family secret no one dared reveal to the world. The document, handwritten by Jung himself in his final months of life in 1961, contained reflections that never appeared in his published works, thoughts he considered too controversial for his time, too dangerous to share with a scientific community still struggling to accept his theories on the collective unconscious. The faded blue ink revealed words that seemed drawn from the depths of a man who dedicated his life to the study of the human psyche. Jung, at 85, facing the final breaths of his earthly journey, had finally decided to document what decades of clinical experience, visionary dreams, and encounters with the inexplicable had revealed to him about the fate of fragmented souls, those that modern medicine would classify as psychopathic or narcissistic, but whom he understood as spirits trapped in labyrinths of unintegrated shadows. The text began with a disturbing observation. During his years of practice, Jung had noticed a peculiar pattern in the final moments of patients exhibiting severe antisocial personality traits. Unlike those who departed peacefully, connected to some form of spiritual transcendence, these individuals seemed to encounter an invisible resistance at the threshold between life and death, as if something prevented them from easily moving on. Their deaths were long, tormented, marked by an agitation that no sedative could fully quell. Jung described, with clinical precision, but also with the poetic sensitivity that always characterized him, how he had observed these patients struggling against forces that seemed intent on keeping them tethered to physical existence. In his secret writings, he recounted visions he had experienced, not dreams, but conscious experiences during deep meditative states, where he contemplated what he called liminal spaces, ethereal regions where souls reorganize themselves after leaving the physical body. The Swiss psychiatrist had reached conclusions that defied both traditional Christian doctrine and the scientific materialism of his time. For Jung, death wasn't a binary event, heaven or hell, existence or extinction, but rather a process of energetic reorganization of consciousness, where each soul naturally gravitated toward dimensions compatible with its level of spiritual development and psychological integration. The pages revealed his most audacious theory: fragmented souls, those who in earthly life had failed to integrate their shadows and develop destructive patterns of relating to other human beings, were not simply punished after death, but were temporarily suspended in intermediate states of existence. These states weren't physical places, but conscious conditions where the soul was repeatedly confronted with the energetic consequences of its actions during incarnation. Jung described these territories as infinite mirrors of the psyche, where the narcissist was forced to experience, firsthand, all the suffering they had caused others, not as external divine punishment, but as a natural process of cosmic equilibrium. The psychopathic soul, devoid of empathy during physical life, was immersed in an ocean of empathic sensations that forced it to feel, for the first time, the pain it had inflicted. The manuscript continued with even more extraordinary accounts. Jung described how, during his near-death experiences, which he had concealed from the public, fearing being considered mentally unstable, he had been guided by archetypal figures through these intermediate planes. There, he had witnessed souls in the process of purification, not through the literal flames of the Christian purgatory, but through intense internal confrontations with their own psychic creations. The language became increasingly poetic as Jung entered territories that defied rational description. He spoke of narcissistic souls, trapped in infinite halls of mirrors, where each reflection showed not their imagined grandeur, but the raw reality of their inner emptiness. He described how these consciousnesses, initially, reacted with rage and denial, trying to shatter the mirrors or flee the reflections, but were eventually confronted with the impossibility of escaping themselves. For psychopathic souls, Jung envisioned an even more complex process. These consciousnesses, who during physical life had specialized in manipulating and inflicting suffering without experiencing remorse, found themselves in states where the absence of empathic connection, which on earth had been their strength, became a terrible prison. They were forced to relive indefinitely every moment of pain they had caused, but now from the victim's perspective, until some level of understanding and genuine remorse emerged from their numbed consciousnesses. The text revealed that Jung had arrived at these conclusions not only through philosophical speculation, but through decades of practical experience with dying patients, extraordinarily vivid lucid dreams, and episodes of consciousness expansion that he carefully documented but never published. He had developed techniques for inducing altered states of consciousness that allowed him, in his own words, to peek through the curtain separating worlds. In a particularly touching passage, Jung described a visionary encounter with his own father, Pastor Paul Achilles Jung, who had died decades earlier. In this encounter, which occurred during a period of serious illness in 1944, his father had revealed truths about the continuity of consciousness after death that contradicted the conventional Christian teachings he had preached during his life. Pastor Jung, now free from earthly doctrinal limitations, had explained to his son that the universe operated according to principles of not punitive, but restorative justice. Every soul, regardless of its deviations during physical incarnation, possessed an indestructible core of divine light. However, for severely fragmented souls, the process of reconnecting with this essential light could require extended periods in intermediate states of purification and integration. Jung wrote about how this revelation had completely transformed his understanding of human psychology. He came to see psychopaths and narcissists not as inherently evil beings, but as souls who had lost themselves so deeply in labyrinths of disconnection that they would require post-mortem healing processes to rediscover their essential humanity. The manuscript also contained detailed descriptions of extraordinary synchronicities Jung had experienced in his later years, as if the universe were confirming his intuitions about the continuity of consciousness. Birds appearing at specific moments, shared dreams with patients he only discovered later, inexplicable physical manifestations in his office. All these events seemed to weave a tapestry of evidence that reality was far more fluid and interconnected than conventional science was willing to admit. One of the most impactful sections of the document dealt with specific cases, obviously anonymized, of patients with severe personality disorders, whom Jung had accompanied to their deaths. In each case, he described how the final moments of these individuals had been marked by experiences suggesting a belated awakening of moral consciousness, as if on the threshold between worlds, something in their souls finally recognized the magnitude of the suffering they had caused. Jung interpreted these last-minute awakenings not as genuine conversions, but as momentary glimpses of the arduous work these consciousnesses would face in the subtle planes of existence. It was as if, for a few moments, the veil concealing their unintegrated shadows was lifted, allowing them to see themselves with terrifying clarity. The Swiss psychiatrist had a fascinating theory about why certain souls developed psychopathic or narcissistic patterns during incarnation. According to his views, these were not random personality defects, but consequences of profound traumas suffered in previous lives, traumas so severe that the soul, upon reincarnation, created extreme defense mechanisms that ended up completely disconnecting it from its ability to feel empathy or genuine love. This perspective completely transformed the way Jung viewed the treatment of these disorders. In his secret writings, he admitted that many cases were practically untreatable during a single incarnation, as they would require not only psychological therapy, but a healing process that transcended the limits of physical existence. It was a humble and disturbing admission from one of history's greatest therapists. Some wounds of the soul were too great to be healed in a single lifetime. However, Jung did not view this with despair but with a profound cosmic hope. According to his visionary revelations, the universe was infinitely patient and compassionate. No soul was lost forever. Even the most fragmented consciousnesses would eventually find their way back to the wholeness that was their essential nature. For those following these extraordinary accounts of the mysteries of consciousness and the afterlife, it's worth remembering that many secrets remain locked away in the archives of history, awaiting the right moment to be revealed. If these discoveries pique your curiosity about the hidden territories of the human soul, Subscribe to our channel to avoid missing the next revelations about the mysteries that humanity's great minds preferred to keep secret. The manuscript continued with even more detailed descriptions of the post-mortem processes Jung had glimpsed for different types of fragmented personalities. For narcissists, he described a process he called the disintegration of the false self, where all the masks and artificial personas they had constructed during physical life simply dissolved, leaving the soul bare before its inner reality. This experience, according to Jung, was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it exposed the emptiness that had always existed beneath the apparent grandeur, but liberating because it finally allowed the true essence of the soul to emerge. Jung had come to understand that narcissism was not, at its root, excessive self-love, but precisely the opposite. It was a deep wound of self-esteem that created an insatiable hunger for external validation. After death, when all external sources of validation disappeared, these souls were forced to confront the inner black hole they had always tried to fill with the admiration of others. The healing process for these consciousnesses involved learning to genuinely nurture themselves, developing for the first time in this continuender. In kemon to siti ente fortic breatert, in kemon to siti entamen superiority over others, but on connection with the inherent divinity that dwelt in their deepest core. It was a delicate and lengthy work, requiring infinite patience from spiritual guides specializing in this type of healing. For psychopathic souls, Jung envisioned an even more complex and prolonged process. These consciousnesses had specialized in such profound empathic disconnection that in a way, they had atrophied their capacity to feel. It was as if entire centers of their energetic structure had crystallized into patterns of insensitivity. The post-mortem process involved a gradual and careful thawing of this crystallization, allowing empathic sensitivity to be slowly restored. Jung described visions where he had witnessed psychopathic souls being cared for by beings of light with infinite patience, like gardeners tending to plants that had been severely damaged. The process did not involve punishment or judgment, but a form of cosmic therapy where each small progress toward empathic reconnection was celebrated and nurtured. One of the manuscript's most surprising revelations was Jung's theory about the cosmic function of these personality types. According to his visions, souls who chose to incarnate with psychopathic or narcissistic predispositions often did so as a form of service, assuming roles as catalysts for the spiritual growth of other souls. They were the necessary villains in the great theatrical play of human evolution, providing opportunities for others to develop compassion, courage, and wisdom. This perspective didn't diminish these souls' responsibility for their actions, nor did it minimize the suffering they caused, but it placed their existences within a broader cosmic context. Jung saw the universe as an intelligent and benevolent system, where even apparent evil served greater evolutionary purposes. It was a vision that completely transcended conventional morality, embracing a cosmic ethic operating on temporal and dimensional scales the average human mind could barely conceive. In the final passages of the manuscript, Jung shared his own preparation for death, describing how his visionary encounters with the subtle planes of existence had completely removed any fear he might have had about his own transition. He knew, with absolute certainty, that death was merely a shift in consciousness, like waking from a dream, or moving from one room to another in an infinite house. Jung described how he had begun to perceive spiritual presences around him with increasing clarity, including deceased patients who came to thank him for his help during their earthly lives, and spirit guides who prepared him for his own post-mortem process. These experiences weren't hallucinations of a declining mind, but natural expansions of perception that occurred as the proximity of death attuned his consciousness to subtler frequencies of reality. The Swiss psychiatrist also revealed that he had received, during his visions, information about his own future work on the spiritual planes. Apparently, his earthly mission to understand and heal the human psyche would continue after his death, but on a much broader and more effective level. He could work directly with souls in transition, especially helping those who had been severely fragmented during their physical incarnations. This revelation brought him deep joy, as it meant that all the suffering he had witnessed during his decades as a therapist, all the pain of the psychotic, narcissistic, and psychopathic patients he had tried to help with limited resources, could finally be truly healed. On the spiritual planes, he would have access to healing resources that completely transcended the limitations of earthly therapy. Jung wrote about how this perspective had transformed his view on therapeutic failure. Cases he had considered failures during his career were now understood as seeds that would only germinate in the richest soils of the spiritual worlds. No therapeutic effort was wasted. All contributed to healing processes that would unfold on timescales far exceeding a single incarnation. The manuscript culminated with a transcendental experience Jung had had a few months before writing the document. During a deep meditation in his office in Kusnacht, his consciousness had been transported to what he described as the coordinating center of post-mortem processes, a dimension where highly evolved entities oversaw and coordinated the healing paths of all souls in transition. In this place, Jung had witnessed a system of cosmic justice and compassion operating with absolute perfection. Each soul, regardless of how fragmented or lost it had become during its physical incarnation, received exactly the kind of help and healing opportunities it needed. There was no arbitrary punishment, nor eternal damnation, but only an infinitely patient love that persisted until each consciousness found its way back to wholeness. Jung had seen psychopathic souls gradually reconnecting with their capacity to feel, through therapeutic processes that lasted the equivalent of hundreds of earthly years, but which were experienced by these consciousnesses as natural periods of growth and discovery. He had witnessed narcissists learning for the first time to genuinely love, not only themselves, but the entire web of existence of which they were a part. The experience had been so overwhelming that Jung spent days in an altered state of consciousness, unable to fully return to consensual reality. When he finally managed to integrate the experience, he understood that he had received a glimpse of the true nature of reality, a reality where love was the fundamental force governing all processes, including those that, from a limited earthly perspective, seemed cruel or unjust. The manuscript ended with a profound reflection on the role of the soul in the human journey. Jung wrote that each incarnation was like a single note in an infinite cosmic symphony. Some souls came to play harmonious and melodious notes, while others assumed the responsibility of playing the dissonances and contrasts necessary for the total music to have depth and emotional complexity. Psychopathic and narcissistic souls were, in this perspective, courageous musicians who accepted to play the most difficult and discordant notes, knowing it would be a painful and lonely role, but essential to the overall beauty of the cosmic composition. Their sacrifice was immense, as it meant spending entire incarnations disconnected from love and harmony, but it was a service that only highly evolved souls would be willing to undertake. Jung concluded that the true tragedy wasn't the existence of fragmented personalities, but humanity's inability to recognize the service these souls rendered to the whole. If people could understand that even the seemingly most malevolent beings were, on some level, their teachers and catalysts for spiritual growth, compassion would replace judgment, and healing would become possible even for the most severe fragmentations. The last lines of the manuscript were a prayer, not in the conventional religious sense, but as an expression of cosmic gratitude. Jung thanked for having been allowed to glimpse the true nature of reality, for understanding that behind all apparent cruelty, there was an infinitely intelligent love orchestrating processes of healing and evolution that completely transcended common human understanding. When the manuscript was finally discovered, decades after Jung's death, those who read it understood why he had chosen to keep it secret. The ideas were too revolutionary for their time, simultaneously challenging religious and materialistic dogmas. But perhaps now, in an age of rapidly expanding human consciousness, The world is finally ready to receive these revelations about the true nature of the soul, death, and the infinite process of healing and evolution that governs all existence. What remains, when the body departs, is not judgment or punishment, but a love so profound and patient that it will persist through all necessary incarnations until each soul, however fragmented it may have become, rediscovers its essential light and its place in infinite cosmic harmony. The journey may be long, especially for those deeply lost in the labyrinths of disconnection, but the destination is always the same, the return home to unified consciousness, where all wounds are healed, and all dissonance resolves into celestial music.